Hi, I'm Maya Zita and you're watching Hammerson Peters. In his 2004 book Thunderbirds, America's Living Legends of Giant Birds, American cryptozoologist Mark Hall wrote about what he called giant owls, mysterious avian predators said to haunt the Ozark Mountains. Is it possible that such creatures exist in the wilds of North America? In this video, we will explore forgotten native legends about monstrous owls in Canada. Enjoy! Before we proceed, it is with great pleasure that we introduce you to the sponsor of this video.
When my maternal ancestor, Andrew Setter, left his family home on Scotland's Orkney Islands around the turn of the 19th century to work for the Hudson's Bay Company, he probably would have laughed out loud if someone told him that his Métis descendant would one day become a Scottish lady with a capital L. But that's exactly what happened last Christmas, when I bought my mom a ladyship through established titles. According to an old Scottish custom, men and women who own land in Scotland have the right to style themselves lairds and ladies. Rather than obtaining this honour through the purchase of a Highland castle or a moorside manor, we commoners can now elevate our lowly states through the purchase of established titles, lordship and ladyship packages. For the price of a Hammerson Peters book, established titles will sell you a square-foot plot of land with a unique plot number on a private estate in the village of Edelston, Scotland, plus a personalized PDF certificate with a crest bearing the name of the lord or lady in question. For a little extra, you can get your certificate printed and mailed to you, with or without a frame. And for every order purchased, established titles, in conjunction with the international charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future, pledges to plant a tree as part of a worldwide reforestation effort, and as a fun and novel way to preserve what the Romans called the Sylvae Caledonia, Scotland's historic forests. The plots of the first 200 people who purchase a title pack using my link will effectively be located within walking distance of my own plot. Together, we can build our own little kingdom in Edelston, Scotland. Established Titles tells me that you could officially include the title Lord or Lady on your credit card, plane ticket, or dating profile. And I can tell you from personal experience that their packages make amazing last-minute gifts. So start drawing up your crest, designing your tartan, and honoring your favorite clansmen by getting the lairds and ladies in your life the gift of a good laugh and an inside joke they'll never forget. Established Titles is offering a massive Valentine's Day sale right now. Plus, if you use the code HAMMERSON, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/Hammerson to get your gifts now and help support this channel.
Purchase of established titles, lordship, and ladyship packages confers neither elevation to the peerage of the United Kingdom nor legal right of land ownership. Souvenir plots being too small to be registered with the Scottish Land Registry. Side effects may include speaking in a Scottish accent, an uncontrollable desire to learn the bagpipes, an aversion to household chores, and an unnatural affinity for haggis.
Since at least Classical Antiquity, owls have enjoyed a place of special significance in various cultures throughout the world. To the ancient Greeks, these kings of the forest canopy represented knowledge and discernment, the little owl being a symbol of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The ancient Hebrews associated the screech owl with the demon Lilith, a mysterious figure of Mesopotamian mythology. In Shakespeare's tragedy of Julius Caesar, the so-called Bird of Night pretended the assassination of the Roman dictator around whom the play revolves, hooting and shrieking in the Forum Romanum in the middle of the day. And for over a century, the image of these haunting, head-turning predators has served some sort of esoteric function for members of America's most influential clandestine organizations, appearing as a tiny embellishment on the Federal Reserve's $1 bill, as a huge stone statue in the Bohemian Club's infamous Grove, and in the Central Intelligence Agency's very first Instagram post. The First Nations of Western Canada were not immune to the allure of these nocturnal birds of prey, featuring them heavily in their legends and folktales. One story involving a monstrous owl appears in Canadian folklorist James R. Stevens' 1995 book, Sacred Legends, a compilation of traditional Oji-Cree stories which Stevens learned from elders of the Sandy Lake First Nation, a remote community in northwestern Ontario. The protagonist of the story is Gyanwe, whom the book's glossary defines as a mythical god from another world who came to the earth to destroy cannibalistic creatures. Another story in the book elaborates on this character's nature, describing him as a strange man descended from another world, who was tall, light-skinned, and wore garments made of cloth that the Indians had never seen before. In this particular story, the alien protagonist decided to investigate a succession of mysterious disappearances which plagued a certain Indian village. His investigation brought him to the strange abode of a young woman, which bore the appearance of a beaver lodge hidden away among the tall pines. While spying on this house from his hiding place in the trees, Guyan Wei saw its young female inmate Bighoot a passing traveler into joining her for dinner. The traveler failed to emerge from the lodge, leading Guyan Wei to suspect that his impromptu hostess had eaten him. He prayed and fasted, through which process he determined that the young woman was indeed a cannibal. Guyan Wei began to change, Stevens wrote. His arms became great wings, and his ears grew feathers, and his feet changed into talons. He looked like a great owl. Off he flew toward the beaver hutch. In his owl disguise, Guyan Wei managed to make his way unannounced into the cannibal woman's home, fooling magic talking furs which hung from the walls, which informed the young woman of all comers and goers. He threw the woman to the ground, breaking her neck and paralyzing her, saying, "You will live the rest of your days in hunger and pain for the evil you have committed." West of Sandy Lake and the rocky forests of the Canadian Shield, beyond Lakes Winnipeg and Manitoba and the Manitoba Parkland, on the prairies of what are now Alberta and Saskatchewan, the Plains Indians had their own owl stories. To the Blackfoot of southern Alberta, owls' ghostly hoots were the cries of lost souls who had yet to find their way to Saskatchewan's great sandhills, the land of the dead. The late Albertan historian Hugh Dempsey, the former chief curator of Calgary's Glenbow Museum and an honorary chief of the Blood Blackfoot Nation, alluded to this belief in his 2003 book, The Vengeful Wife and Other Blackfoot Stories. In his retelling of Heavy Collar and the Ghost Woman, a classic Blackfoot ghost story which we have explored in an earlier piece, Dempsey wrote, "The owl was the messenger of death, and ghosts sometimes used its cries as they wandered through the night." West of Blackfoot territory, along the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, lies the traditional territory of the Stoney Indians, a collection of 3 bands whose storytellers still speak of a monstrous owl which legend says haunts the mountains. According to journalist Jordan Small in his Halloween 2021 article for the news site Rocky Mountain Outlook, this ghastly shape-shifting entity is called the Bata, or Howler, and can sometimes be heard shrieking at night in the woods beyond Chiniki Lake. Quoting filmmaker Jurette Two Young Men, a beer spa Stoney native from Morley, Alberta, Small wrote, "It's something a lot of people are afraid to talk about, even elders, and especially at night." Although the Howler is believed to have the ability to assume a variety of different forms, it most often appears to helpless witnesses as a large owl with the head of a man and the legs of a horse. With nasty yellow eyes glowing with malevolence, Small wrote, the Bata has been said to stalk and hide out in trees at a vantage point like a massive bird of prey waiting to swoop down on unsuspecting victims with razor-sharp talons ready to shred flesh. If seen, the Bata's unnatural powers are said to cause paralysis. Some Stoney storytellers believe that the Howler is the spirit of a Stoney Indian who became lost in the woods near Chiniki Lake, transformed into something terrifying and unnatural by the sinister power which some say pervades the area. 2 young men claimed to have had a run-in with the Howler himself while living alone in a house near Chiniki Lake. One night, After coming home from powwow practice, the filmmaker heard coyotes howling outside and opened his window to let in the wild music. About 10 minutes later, the coyotes abruptly stopped their yipping. Suddenly, it just went silent. The filmmaker told Small, "I remember it being silent. So I peeked out my window and it was dead silent, and then I heard the screaming. I lived next door to my dad and I thought that someone was screaming or playing around, and I started looking around at my dad's house, and then I heard the screaming coming towards my house. It was terrifying. It was a scream that I had never heard before, like a scream of an owl or something. It was the most terrifying screaming I had ever heard, like a hound from hell, man. I can't describe it. So I got spooked. I shut the window and I grabbed my dog and just huddled under the window and just turned all the lights off. Like, I do not want to see what that thing is at all. In my head, I was imagining this woman with black eyes and screaming around everywhere." South of Stoney Territory is the ancestral homeland of the Kootenay Indians, a unique tribe whose members, in the old days, left their mountain homes once a year, heading out onto the easterly prairies to look for buffalo on the hunting grounds of the Blackfoot. One of the best written sources on Kootenay oral tradition is the 1918 book Kootenay Tales, written by the famous German-American anthropologist Franz Boas. In this book, Boas included 4 slightly different versions of a traditional Kootenay story involving a monstrous owl, all of which appear to be variations of the Zunukwa or basket ogress legend of Vancouver Island. Instead of the old child-eating woman of Pacific Northwest mythology, the antagonist of the story is an old male owl. According to the 3 or 4 versions of the story presented in Boas's book, there was once a huge man-eating owl which kidnapped crying children and carried them away in a birch bark basket. This creature's predations were so incessant that soon a particular Kootenay village was entirely bereft of its children. Coyote, the trickster figure of Kootenay mythology, concocted a plan by which to rescue the kidnapped children. Like the little ones who had gone before him, he began to cry. His bawling attracted the attention of the owl monster, who swooped down on him, threw him into a basket, and carried him back to his tent. Inside, Coyote found the missing children who had disappeared from the village. Using tree sap, he gummed Owl's eyes shut, rendering him blind, before pushing him onto his own fire. The trickster tended the fire until the monster was reduced to ashes, whereupon he restored the children to their grieving parents. The 4th story in Boas's book is nearly identical to an old Chilliwack Indian Sasquatch story from the North Cascade Mountains, a story evoking the Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale of Western Europe, which we explored in an earlier piece. It revolves around a little girl named Chipmunk and her grandmother and housemate, Frog. According to this story, Chipmunk had a propensity to explore the woods, much to her grandmother's consternation. One day, she scampered into a particular stretch of forest that her grandmother had forbidden her to enter, unbeknownst to her, the domain of a monstrous child-eating owl. This area was thick with partridge berries and rose hips, which Chipmunk happily commenced to pick. As she foraged, she was approached by Owl, who attempted to fool her, telling her that he had been instructed to bring her home by various members of her family, all of whom had actually died years earlier. Chipmunk, cognizant of the stranger's sinister intentions, turned the tables on her would-be abductor, tricking him into covering his large and frightening eyes, to which she took objection. When Owl's eyes were closed, Chipmunk made a desperate break for home. The youngster reached her grandmother's tent and told Frog about her frightening experience. Knowing that Owl would follow her tracks, Frog hid her granddaughter in a pot of rotten soup. Sure enough, Owl trailed Chipmunk to her grandmother's tent and asked the old woman for something to eat. Left with no other choice, Frog invited the monster to partake in the rotten soup. Owl discovered Chipmunk hiding inside and ate her. Crushed by the sudden death of her granddaughter, Frog waited until Owl expelled the pellet containing Chipmunk's bones. She collected her granddaughter's pitiful remains and threw them into some water, which through some mysterious process allowed Chipmunk to come back to life. West of the Rocky Mountains and the Columbia Mountains beyond lies British Columbia's interior plateau. This arid land of grassy hills and ponderosa pine forests is the traditional homeland of the interior Salish, a people composed of 5 major nations: the Shuswap, the Okanagan, the Nicola, the Thompson, and the Lillooet. Storytellers from each of these nations told tales about monstrous owls, one of which is clearly a variation of the aforementioned Kootenay story featuring coyote and owl. Although every version of the story is a little different, most iterations agree that Owl was an old, dim-witted predator which preyed on children. Depending on the storyteller, Owl could be either male or female. One day, Owl kidnapped a large bunch of children and carried them back to her camp, intending to eat them. She smeared pitch on their eyes in an effort to blindfold them, but the children, on the advice of the oldest and wisest among them, who, in some versions, is the trickster coyote, screwed their eyes shut tightly so that the tar wouldn't be as effective. In preparation for her meal, Owl began to do the feast dance around her fire, working herself into a frenzy. Playing on her vanity, the oldest of the children praised her dancing and suggested that she dance closer to the fire so that the children could better see her. Owl did as suggested, whereupon the oldest children shoved her into the fire and held her there with sticks. As Owl burned to death, tiny objects, either fleas or lice which escaped from beneath her feathers, or sparks and ashes which issued from her smoldering corpse, flew into the air and became small animals, like mosquitoes, sandflies, or tiny birds. Another owl story in the interior Salish share in common with the Kootenay is the tale of Owl and Chipmunk, a slightly different version of which is told by each tribe. In the Okanagan version of this story, Chipmunk hid from Owl in a clamshell and was brought back to life when her grandmother replaced her heart, which Owl ripped out, with a half-ripe serviceberry. In most interior Salish iterations of this legend, Owl clawed at Chipmunk with her talons when the latter escaped her in the woods, tearing 2 strips off her back. As Okanagan storyteller Mourning Dove put it in her 1933 book Coyote Tales, Owl Woman's fingers clawed down Chipmunk's back, ripping off long strips of the soft fur, but the little girl got away. This, declared the prolific Scots-Canadian anthropologist James Tite in his 1909 treatise on the Shuswap Indians, is the reason the chipmunk at the present day has stripes extending along its back. These are the marks of the owl's claws where it scratched before the chipmunk made its escape. The Shuswap, the northernmost of the interior Salish nations, believed that the hoots of an owl portend imminent death. Canadian geologist Dr. George Mercer Dawson referred to this belief in his 1892 book, Notes on the Shuswap People of British Columbia, writing, "The owl is a bird somewhat dreaded, and is said to haunt camps where someone is dead, or in which are the relatives of someone who has died somewhere else, saying, 'Tu, asum chakis,' he is a long time dead." This is evidently a fancy based on the resemblance of the owl's notes to the words in question. The The Shuswap shared this superstition with the Lillooet far to the west, who, according to James Tite in his 1906 treatise on that nation, believed that an owl to hoot night after night near a house or camp foretold the death of an inmate of the house or some relative of an inmate. The mythological explanation for this belief appears in James Tite's 1909 treatise on the Shuswap in the form of an owl legend unique to that people and their southwesterly Thompson neighbors, which shares some similarities with the Basket Ogre-style owl tales above described. Owl, Tite began in his retelling of this legend, was a man possessed of mysterious powers, and a noted hunter. He lived by himself. A long distance from Owl's house was Shuswap village, in which lived a woman and her young son. The boy cried constantly for no good reason, and so his mother left him in a dark corner of the house, telling him that Owl would come and take him away in his basket. After a time, Tite wrote, the people noticed that the boy had ceased crying, and thought he had fallen asleep. The mother went to look for him, but could not find him. Then the people took torches and searched for him, but in vain. He was not to be found. Owl had carried him away in his basket, the bottom of which was set with many awls, which were stuck in points up. Owl took the boy to his home. Instead of eating him, he decided to raise him as his son. Every day, Tite wrote, he washed him in streams and rubbed his body with fir branches, so that the boy grew very fast and became wise. Owl gave him a bow and arrows and taught him to shoot mice, the skins of which he stretched and dressed, leaving them in their drying frames when they changed their camp on the following morning. At every successive camp the pair stopped at, Owl trained the boy to shoot ever larger game, graduating from mice to chipmunks to rabbits to deer, and finally to big game like caribou and bear. While Owl was training his young protégé, the boy's relatives were scouring the wilderness in search for him. They came upon Owl's first camp, and correctly deduced that the mice skins drying in the frames were the work of their boy. Thus they followed from one camp to another, Tite wrote, until they at last reached the place where the youth lived with Owl. Through some precognition, both Owl and his adopted son learned of the relative's presence. The boy, who yearned to be reunited with his family, devised a clever plot by which he escaped the old bird of prey and returned to his people. When Owl caught up with the fleeing natives, the boy, having become more powerful than his master, transformed the magic monster into an ordinary owl, saying, "You shall only be a little wiser than the others, and able to give warning when people are about to die." Like the Thompson, the Shuswap also have an old story in which Coyote, the trickster and transformer, while traveling aimlessly throughout the country, happened upon a cannibal. According to James Tite in his 1898 collection of Thompson Indian stories, the Shuswap sometimes identified this man-eater as a monstrous owl. Bedecked with a necklace of human fingernails and toenails, the monster went about loudly proclaiming his dietary inclinations to all he met. Eager to avoid a duel with the ghoul, Coyote attempted to intimidate him, expressing doubt as to his self-professed gastronomic proclivities and declaring that he himself was the only man-eater in that country. Outraged, the cannibal proposed that the two of them disgorge the contents of their stomachs to prove to each other that they were both consumers of human flesh. Coyote agreed on the condition that they both keep their eyes closed while they vomited. The two travelers proceeded to vomit with their eyes closed. During this process, Coyote inconspicuously swapped some of his own vomit with that of his opponent, tricking the cannibal into believing that he was the great man-eater. South of Shuswap territory is the fertile wooded land of the Okanagan Indians. According to folklorist Nancy Perkins Wincoop and N. Wynkoop Clark in their 1985 book, In the Stream, An Indian Story, the Okanagan believed that an owl-like monster very much resembling the Howler of Stoney legend once haunted the forests of southern British Columbia. This creature was said to be half as tall as the trees, and to emit a horrible screech when agitated. Its head and neck resembled those of an owl. Its shoulders and arms were vaguely human-like and grotesque in appearance. The body, the folklorists wrote, resembled a bear, while the legs, feet, and hands were the shape of an eagle's claw. The whole creature was covered with wool, scales, feathers, and hair, with a great mane of bristles that he raised and dropped as he chose. Like other owl monsters of First Nations legend, this creature was said to carry a woven basket for the purpose of hauling children, deer, and other tender meats of the land. West of the interior plateau among the forested mountains, valleys, and inlets of southwestern British Columbia lies the ancestral homeland of the Central Coast Salish, a collection of small tribes united by a common language. Like their interior Salish cousins to the east, these people told stories about monstrous owls which carry off human beings. In his 1904 report on the traditions of Chehalis and Skalitz, two Coast Salish nations native to British Columbia's Agassiz-Harrison Valley, British American folklorist Charles Hill Tout included a story about just such a creature, told to him by Chehalis elder Mary Ann. According to this story, there was once a discontented little girl who constantly cried whenever she didn't get her way. One night, during one of her tantrums, a monstrous owl swooped down and carried her off to his nest in a tall tree. Mary Ann called this creature Slalakum owl, Slalakum being a Halkumelam word denoting a strange creature with preternatural abilities. The owl kept the girl until she was grown, whereupon he took her to wife. The girl often pined for her home from her treetop prison and resolved to return there. One day, she prevailed upon her owl husband to allow her to climb to the bottom of the tree so that she could urinate. When Owl was not looking, she took off to the forest. In time, she reached her family's village and hid herself in the rafters of her father's longhouse. Owl tracked his wife back to her home and asked her family if she was hiding there. The family, who wanted nothing to do with the young woman on account of her incessant crying, gave her up to the monster, who took her back to his nest. There, the woman gave birth to the owl's child, which tragically burned to death shortly thereafter in a fire set by the woman's brother. Native superstitions regarding owls can be found even further to the west, on Vancouver Island. According to anthropologist Barbara Lane in her 1953 study of native Northwest Coast religion, the Cowichan Indians who inhabited the southern end of the island believed that all owls, both large and small, were ghosts and held the killings of them taboo. If you killed one of her informants explained, you'd die very soon. The Cowichan also believed that owls had the ability to speak human words and sometimes said the following sentence out loud to natives: "Not very long you're going to cry." It was believed that anyone who heard these words from an owl would soon lose a family member. The Kwakiutul, or Kwakwakiwaks, who once dominated Vancouver Island's northeastern shores, had their own ideas about owls which echoes that of other Western Canadian tribes. In his 1932 essay on the beliefs of the Kwakiutul, the aforementioned anthropologist Franz Boas wrote, "The owl, go, 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 is believed to attack young children. Therefore, when parents carrying their children see or hear one of them, they will shout, 'This child is getting gray on the side, my dear.' The owls are children, and it is believed that these words will deceive them, so that they will believe that the children are old people. The screech owl is believed to be the soul of a deceased person. The Indians catch them, paint them red, and let them free, asking for a long life. Far to the north, on the border of British Columbia and Canada's Yukon Territory, lies the domain of the Kaska Indians, a Dene or Athabascan people. In a 1917 article on Kaska folklore, James Tite included a traditional Kaska story outlining the origin of the Owl Woman, a strange winged creature said to haunt the northern forests. According to this disturbing tale, there was once a woman who married two brothers at the same time. The woman's mother was an evil sorceress who coveted her sons-in-law. One day, the old woman convinced her daughter to climb a tall tree to secure some owl feathers for her. As she did so, the young woman began to grow feathers and gradually transformed into a huge owl, the result of her mother's black magic. Her spell complete, the old mother proceeded to dress herself in her daughter's clothes and, through application of the black arts, assumed the likeness of her daughter. Although she looked like a young woman, the impostor could not hide her frailty, which aroused the suspicion of her sons-in-law. The two brothers eventually learned of the old woman's wicked deed and promptly put an end to their mother-in-law's existence. The brothers then found their wife in a tree in the form of a giant owl and begged her to return to them. "No," she answered, "you have killed my mother, so I shall remain an owl." Ever since, the owl woman has glided silently through the boreal forests, joining the timber wolves in their nightly laments with her mournful hoots, grieving for the mother and husbands she lost.
Believe it or not, tales of giant owls in the Canadian wilderness are not restricted to the campfire stories of First Nations legend. Readers of my 2020 book, Mysteries of Canada Volume 2, may recall the story of Kelly Shamandi, Canada's last bear oil salesman, the son of a Syrian peddler, who became famous for the bear oil pomade he sold from his trading post in the Ontario wilderness. Mr. Shamandi was brought to my attention by my friend and fellow researcher Kevin Gould, who came across an article in the April 17, 1951 issue of the Pittsburgh Press, proclaiming that Shamandi had put up a $100 reward for anyone who could bring him the carcass of a giant bird of prey that had been harassing livestock in the wilderness of northern Ontario. Shamandi had a museum attached to his store, and apparently thought that the monster would make a nice addition to it. Farmers Ted Lind and Howard MacDonald, who claimed to have seen the bird about 50 miles east of Timmins, Ontario, not far from the village of Vermore, described it as an avian colossus with huge talons, a hooked beak, jet black feathers, and the likeness of an owl. With a wingspan of about 9 feet, this creature had snatched up fish and meat which the farmers had strung up beyond the reach of wolves, leaving behind the tattered remains of the rope from which they had depended. Shamandi himself, apparently having interviewed other witnesses who preferred to remain anonymous, claimed that the bird had yellow eyes the size of silver dollars and was large enough to carry off a small cow. A few days after publishing his offer, Kelly Shamandi upped the bounty to $150 on the condition that the giant owl be captured alive, fearing that his initial overture would prompt locals to commit wholesale slaughter of the birds, shooting first and examining them afterwards. To the best of this author's knowledge, the fate of this monstrous owl remains a mystery. The giant owl of Timmins, Ontario, eerily evokes an owlish monster said to haunt the Ozark Mountains of the American states of Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, which appears in cryptozoologist Mark A. Hall's 2004 classic, Thunderbirds, America's Living Legends of Giant Birds. Drawing from American folklorist Vance Randolph's 1951 book, We Always Lie to Strangers, Hall quoted, "In many wild, isolated places, one hears of enormous booger owls, with a wingspread of 10 to 12 feet, so bold as to carry off lambs, calves, dogs, even children." Hall dubbed this creature Bighoot, writing that it appears to be a capable predator, active largely at night, and able to fit into the modern environment by means of camouflage known for owls. There is a record of such a creature in American Indian folklore. it has a predecessor in the fossil record of birds, and there are hints that it is not unique to North America. This owl probably remains little known by being both rare and active almost exclusively at night. Hall went on to propose that Bighoot might be a surviving Ornitomegalonyx odoroi, also known as the Cuban giant owl, a huge predator, believed to be the largest owl that ever existed, supposed to have gone extinct about 8,000 years ago. These giant man-eating owls vaguely evoke the Piasa Bird, a legendary monster of Cahokia Indian folklore. This creature appears in the journal of Father Joseph Marquette, a Catholic priest and missionary, who, in the company of coureurs des bois, or independent French fur traders under the command of Louis Joliet, became the first white man to paddle the upper Mississippi River in 1672. On the course of their journey, the travelers stayed at a number of native villages, whose inhabitants all insisted on feeding them morsels of food by hand, a curious article of native Mississippi hospitality. Shortly thereafter, the company came across a startling riverside pictograph overlooking the upper Mississippi, depicting a bearded, horned, scaly, winged monster of native mythology, which appeared to mark the territory of the Cahokia, Illinois Indians. While skirting some rocks, Marquette wrote in French, by which their height and length inspired awe, we came upon one of the two painted monsters, which at first made us afraid, and upon which the boldest savages dare not long rest their eyes. They are as large as a calf. They have horns on their heads like those of a deer, a horrible look, red eyes, a beard like a tiger's, a face somewhat like a man's, a body covered with scales, and so long a tail that it winds all around the body, passing above the head and going back between the legs, ending in a fish's tail. Green, red, and black are the three colors composing this picture. Moreover, these two monsters are so well painted that we cannot believe that any savage is their author, for good painters in France would find it difficult to paint so well. And besides, they are so high up on the rock that it is difficult to reach that place conveniently to paint them. I'd like to end this piece with a story told to me by my friend Kassie regarding a very strange experience she had near Lesser Slave Lake, Alberta, involving both owls and an unidentified flying object. By sheer coincidence, and without any solicitation from me, Kassie brought the story to my attention on the very night that I was finishing up this piece. Lesser Slave Lake is a huge body of water nestled in the boreal forest, roughly halfway between the cities of Edmonton and Peace River. In the summer of 2020, Kassie went camping in the woods near the lake. On the night of August 22nd, 2020, she was relaxing by her campfire when she noticed that two owls were hooting incessantly in the trees nearby, this twilight cacophony being the prelude to a very strange experience which has haunted her ever since. The following is Kassie's account of this unusual event, in her own words.
For about an hour, these two owls were carrying on and on very oddly. They'd interrupt each other and were so loud. I thought, oh, I wish I could see where they were. As I did, one huge owl came and sat on top of a far spruce. Then it suddenly stopped, and the owl flew off. As I'm watching this owl fly off, I noticed a star, and thought it was a falling star? But it never fell, just continued heading north. As it went off in the distance, and I couldn't see it anymore, I looked up, and I moved my head back towards the fire. Above me, a few hundred feet above the treetops, was this round light. It seemed to be sitting there. It then moved forward a little and hovered. It was completely silent. I sat and watched it. Then it tipped a little and this huge, bright, dull, bluey purpley light burst out of it. It was absolutely stunning. It then took off in the same direction as the star. That was it. The whole thing completely captivated me for weeks. The owls would not get out of my head. I finally decided the owls and the lights had to be connected, and started doing some digging, and found out that there's supposed to be a connection between UFOs and owls. So I went back to the campsite, and spent as much time as I could there. It was a pretty uncomfortable position to be in, but I needed more evidence and truth for myself. I ended up having a few more experiences with owls and UFOs at Slave. I usually would hear the owls when I was either getting ready for bed or waking up. They're extremely loud and noisy, and they don't sound like normal owls. It sounds like they're surrounding you.
About half an hour after hearing the owls, Kassie would invariably see strange lights maneuvering unnaturally in the sky. Kassie went on to tell me about other strange occurrences that have since taken place at her own home, the details of which she does not want me to divulge. These events are often accompanied by drained batteries, flickering light bulbs, and electronic malfunctions, which she is at a loss to explain. Kassie's research into the relationship between owls and unexplained phenomena has led her to believe that the spirits of deceased family members sometimes return to Earth in the form of these nocturnal birds of prey, to watch over their loved ones and deliver important messages to them.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you would like to support the channel, please visit the Established Titles website in the link in the description below. Take care!